I'm Kat Spada of WIF, and I'm so excited for the conversation we're going to have here today about the Peacock original limited series, A Friend of the Family. I'm joined by the women who are responsible for the show's immersive storytelling, look and feel, and who helmed its unforgettable performances. So I'm just going to go around the room. I'll introduce everyone one by one. I want to welcome Eliza Hittman, who joined us for a conversation a couple of years ago for her film, Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always, and who not only executive produced this show, but also directed its first and third episodes. Hi, Eliza.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Welcome back. We're also joined by Rachel Goldberg, an alumna of the WIF mentoring program, as well as our financing intensive with Sundance Institute, who directed episodes 2 and 4. Welcome, Rachel.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
And another alumna of the WIF Sundance Institute Financing Intensive, Lauren Wolkstein, directed the breathtaking series finale. And the women behind the camera of every episode of A Friend of the Family, we have cinematographers Celiana Cardenas. Welcome, Celiana.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
And Hilda Mercado. Hello, Hilda.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so excited, but I want to give a couple of PSAs up front to anybody watching this today. First of all, applications are now open for the WIF Sundance Institute Financing Intensive. So if you want to check that out, as well as several of our fellowship programs, go to wif.org to find out more if you're interested in applying. And I'm going to give a content warning to anyone watching this. If you haven't watched the series, or even if you have, the subject matter deals with sexual abuse. So proceed with care if that is difficult to consume. And also the WIF helpline is available for support and resources to anyone who has experienced harassment or abuse while working in the entertainment industry. So info about that can also be found on our website. Now, with that, for anyone unfamiliar with the story portrayed in the series, it might be shocking to learn that this sometimes unbelievable course of events was inspired by the true story of Jan Broberg's abduction during her childhood in the 1970s and the grooming and abuse that pervaded her entire family story. Eliza, can you tell me about the involvement of Jan and her mother, Marianne? They were producers. And then when the show started with the real life Jan, like how did that decision get made? It was startling, really.
I think Jan was heavily involved at all phases of the process. I think that her involvement in the production was a tremendous asset. She was very generous, I think, in the writing of the show and in the conceptualization of the visual world of the show. She really opened up her life to every single department head working on the production, every single writer, and was just able to give archives of photos and diaries and relics from their lives. We needed her involvement. We needed her trust. And I think that her involvement helped the story ultimately because it prevented anybody from judging any aspect of their lives. And she was just a tremendous source of support and enthusiasm and information from like beginning to end of the process. And she is a true survivor. And I think seeing that and feeling that through the process was really important.
It was certainly very emotionally affecting to have her give this disclaimer up front that nobody thinks this could happen to their family. And that really does invite compassion when you're asking yourself the question, how could this have happened? How could this decision have been made? So as a framing device, this brings me to a little bit of a spoiler, but in the 9th and final episode, Lauren, you worked with Jan as an actor on the set. And I'm curious about that experience as a survivor on set, dealing with her own real life trauma, but also just as an actor working opposite Colin Hanks, who disappeared into this role completely.
Yeah, it was incredible having Jan there and just really surreal to see her kind of become the therapist that she is actually talking to her younger self. And I think only because Jan has been through this for so many years and has done her own healing, that she was able to kind of come to it with so much grace and generosity with telling her story. She's an incredible actress, and she just kind of transformed into that role, and it was wonderful to see her with McKenna, to see her with Colin, who she kept saying that Bob, her father, was like channeled through Colin during that time. And it was just really one of the most special days on set was having Jan there, because we're all here a part of this story because of her and her just the courage that she has to be able to tell her story after all these years. She was just so, I just remember talking to her before we even knew that she was gonna play the therapist. When I got involved, just calling her up and how generous she was with her time to wanna, she's had to tell this story over so many times, and just, she continues to tell it with such grace. And it's just she's an incredible human being. And so I don't think the story would have been what it is without her involvement. And so it's amazing that she was involved so early on with Nick and Eliza.
You said the word courage, and I think courage and forgiveness were themes that I kept feeling in the stories with the Broberg family. And it then felt very welcoming for me, knowing that there were a lot of women kind of in charge of the sets of this show, because these characters had to forgive themselves, they had to forgive each other, and then to kind of recognize Jan, the real Jan, in that moment. It felt like a transformational moment, really, in the show and in real life. And as a viewer, like, there were a lot of layers to that. But you all worked with this incredible cast, and Celiana in particular, I wanted to ask you how you made moments where I felt like Jake Lacy was staring at me through my television. It was incredibly immersive. I mean, certainly Eliza mentioned the maybe library that Jan could bring of the actual visual style, but there were just absolutely these like direct to camera shots of Jake or of McKenna that were startling.
Yeah, so I think as the series progressed, you're probably talking about episode 5 and 6. When I talked with Steven, which is the director of those episodes, he wanted to feel how he was really controlling her mind and Jan in every possible way. So we start doing these close-ups with close diopters, with wide lenses and close diopters. The feeling of that is almost like he's looking straight to camera, but he's, sometimes directly to McKenna. But the feeling was that you get immersed in his glance, for calling it that way. So it was very interesting to get to there, right? Doing this combination between the lens and something that we use that's called close diopters.
It was, there were definitely in episodes 5 and 6 when we're seeing a little bit of this, really how much Berchtold ingratiated himself into the Broberg family. There were several shots or scene transitions where I felt like his eye line would be off camera, and then it would turn and you would realize that he was staring at Jan. And it was like, it didn't feel like watching a horror movie. But it felt like, probably all of us have had that experience when you're at a party and there's just somebody giving you the heebie-jeebies. Like, that was the kind of the sensation I got just from some of those moments. And it really, maybe I should have spaced out my watching and not have been so utterly creeped out. That could have also helped. This is the binging experience.
I'm amazed that you were able to binge it.
Yeah.
It's difficult to...
Yeah, and I think also from the moment that Eliza, and you can tell me, Eliza, if I'm wrong, I'm saying something that is not right, but it was how that we could show this character with all his malignant personality, but not to make it so creepy, like how that we can make it subtle, but it can start growing. We can start seeing it and discover it as an audience. How it start creeping for me was like humidity. How it start creeping into the walls and that. And Eliza was very clear about how she wanted to approach this, because it was very easy to show a bad guy, but how we show this guy, this particular character, and what is very unique in the series, where it's not about him, it's about the family. That's, I think, what it makes it so different. We're not centered on him, it's about the family.
Yeah, and how Jan, excuse me for interrupting, how Jan sees, this beat through her eyes, which I think is that part of the creepiness that you said that you're crawling into, like, immediately. So it's like, I think that's really, really, like, for me, like, important about how to be in her mind and, representing what is happening around her and her family.
Yeah, Eliza, do you want to speak to that the charming element that needed to be present? And even I don't know if you were involved in the casting of Jake Lacy, for example.
Jake has a complex ordinariness, so to speak, that he brings to the series. And I think it was important early on that the character not feel too villainous, not feel too sleazy, not feel too overtly creepy. And you had to believe that he was able not just to win over this family, but the whole community. And in order to do that, he has to feel and look and be just like them. So we didn't want to give anything away. And I think that was really important, in the casting of that role.
And Jake and I talked a lot about that too, because in my episodes with Hendrix, and especially like trying to re-seduce Marianne, it's easy to like sort of fall into that creepiness. But we were talking about like, and Jan said this too, like how his superpower is that like he almost believes the things that he's saying. There is a charmingness. There is like, when he's saying it, there's a sincerity to it. And then finding those moments of like darkness. And like Jake was so adept at like, he'll turn it on and just for a second show the camera what's really happening. But it's like this fine, delicate, beautiful line.
And I think in terms of the performance, in setting up the character, in setting up the journey, what we talked a lot about, like what's the energy that he brings to that first episode? Like what's the energy that's really carrying him through? And it's not a malicious energy. Like the energy that we crafted together in the first episode, particularly, which sets him up for the season, was that he was running away with the woman he loved. And that's the way that we talked about it. Like, I kept saying, like, Jake, you're getting married. Like everything you're doing is because you are sneaking away with the person you love most to get married.
Maybe he had to breathe out the person he is and breathe in the person that he was portraying in those scenes. Actually, Eliza and Hilda, there were some questions I had about the tone. And now that you bring up this this notion of like the romantic quality, like a few, especially in the last couple of episodes, I was reminded of like a Cary Grant, Audrey Hepburn caper almost. It's like we're going across state lines. We're on the beach. We're at this Catholic school. Austin Stoll is playing this FBI agent who's pursuing him in this really frustrating way. Can you talk to me about the tone and the scope of these episodes and how you accomplished it was completely seamless, but there were some sequences that felt like an action sequence and others that felt like a mystery. And I'm curious how you accomplished that.
I think those episodes was in particular what you're talking about is episode 4 and Rachel, unless you have, because Eliza was involved in all of the episodes, but I think the scenes that you're describing is the ones that Rachel directed on episode 4. Am I right? Or I'm just...
Yeah, like the caper, that Hilda and I worked on together, like it was really interesting because, obviously Eliza said a very specific look, like very like slow. And so what was cool was that Nick really wanted a huge juxtaposition between like the before the kidnapping and then the after the kidnapping. And what was consistent was like the beautiful cinematography that Hilda and Celiana created, and the production design by John, and the costumes by Rebecca Gregg. Like that was consistent, but then Hilda and I had freedom to create a new camera language. And my background's in action. So what was really funny to me, but also wonderful, was that like Nick was like, okay, you've directed Mayans, and like you've directed like these action sequences. That's what this episode is. And I was like, okay, but it gave us permission to like really move the camera, play with Steadicam. And then when things were falling apart, making it more handheld. And Hilda was like such a fabulous collaborator. And, to what Hilda was mentioning before, she helped design this really beautiful language of the abduction, of the abuse. So symbols that were the abduction and the abuse, like the box, the ring, and Jake himself, B himself, like blowing kisses. And Hilda can speak to it, like found this beautiful lens and this flare that sort of became that language. So we had freedom to create sort of a new language for that, the abduction and the caper and all of that.
Can you elaborate a little bit about the symbols and working with the actors who played Jan, Hendrix Yancey, who was new to me and just a complete revelation, just this fresh, bright spot. And McKenna Grace, who I've already been a fan of for 500 years. She's amazing. These aren't explicit scenes. We know the subject matter that we're dealing with, but we aren't presented with anything. And we don't really need to be presented with anything explicit. But I'm curious about, yes, those choices, but also how do you work with actors in scenes like that where they might be grappling with something that's a little above their age or maturity level?
It was so important to all of us to protect Hendrix, and she is phenomenal. She is such a talent and such a star. And we had a team to really keep her safe. We had a therapist who was there who made sure that she was safe and the rest of us were safe. We had a wonderful acting coach, Megan McGrary, who's just so lovely and was like a huge full-time support to both Hendrix and her mom. And Hendrix herself is just so willing to give. So it was very important just to give her that safe space to play. But also we protected her from the content. So she was playing the truth of the scenes. For Jan, she thought she was being abducted by aliens. So that was the scene for Hendrix. You've been abducted by aliens, you've woke up, you're trapped in this trailer and your family's not around. Like that's the truth of the scene. And then like in the doctor's office, we actually edited the sides. So when we shot her coverage, it was different language than when we shot the doctor's coverage. So we could always protect her. Like that was at the forefront of everyone's mind. But she's so funny. Like just two of my favorite stories with her. One was, I was like, so Hendrix, what are your favorite scenes? And she's like, oh, I love the ones where I'm like tied down because I love having this struggle, which was amazing because like these are the most intense scenes. And she was so proud of herself. And she gave the most incredible performance. Like when she finds B in the kitchen, like she's just such a gem. And then there was a scene with Colin where she wants to take a basket to the Birchtolds and he won't let her, and she just yells at him and it's like so visceral. But when she was doing it, it was kind of like strained, and finally I was like, Hendrix, I just want you to yell at him, yell the way you yell at your own parents. Like just do what feels right. And she did it and it was on fire, and Colin was like, Hendrix, that's the one. And she came up to me and she's like, Rachel, I do really well with like creative freedom. And I was like, you always have creative freedom, but she's just the best.
That was wonderful. And it's interesting to think about those scenes where she might not have known the entire context, but it was the most maybe playful part of the acting experience in those very difficult moments. And for our cinematographers here, can you also speak a little bit to like scenes in the mobile home. Is that what it's even called? The RV.
Yeah.
How do you work in a set like that? Or did you have sets that were secondary?
No, because something that I really love, and Eliza was also into it, and we have one more home that was a perfect match for B's more home. So of course it's tight and everything. And first, we have meetings about, no, we're cutting in half, and then we're gonna build half of the set. And then Eliza say, wait a second, no, let's embrace the tightness and let's go for it and let's see what happened. And also we couldn't cut it in half because later we have to move that more home to do the driving, etc. And I was like, yes, let's go for it. And also, it was real. Everything that you saw, it comes from that period, like the fabric, all the lamps, everything was period. So it was going to be very difficult to recreate it again. So we just embraced it, Hilda, Eliza, and every director, and we just went for it. And I think it worked really well. Like, I love the feeling of the motor home because you feel in there, like it's no trick, to say that.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Like, when I was hearing all the process about that, if they're gonna cut it in half or build, half here, half there, I think it was a great decision just to be there, because also what we want to have is feel that we're in that moment at that precise time. And I think even though it was cumbersome to shoot inside in a very restricted area, sometimes it was really hot, and sometimes it was just how to fit 2 cameras, and sometimes, well, no, it's only one, which actually I think it helps to just have that constraint to be more in their space and their mental space too. So I think that was a great decision, and everybody embraced it. We have a lot of scenes working with Rachel, really a lot. And then we have moving, and, like Celiana said, we have a lot of some other scenes that we have to go to California. So that same RV had to be driven or towed or whatever to California to get these driving scenes. But I think it really worked really nice, for the story. I think I like that decision was taken, and that we embraced it, and we did the best of it. And I think it works really nice. The scenes feel very intimate, not only, with B and Jan, but also with B and Marianne, all these very intimate scenes there. I think the space helped to build the scene and the emotional arc.
You can really feel the walls kind of closing in on them in that space. You kind of feel as claustrophobic as they are when you're in that space. So it just adds to what Hilda's saying about the intimacy of the scenes. You can't really recreate that with a set.
My question is Anna Paquin. She's fantastic in this, and it's something so different. I mean, this is someone who's also been acting since she was so young, and who has to deal with the challenge of what Marianne dealt with, which is so complex and different. You could be watching an entire story about what Marianne went through without what everybody else went through. And I'm just curious if anyone has anything to share about working with her, or how she worked with the other actors on set.
She is such a force. She gives so much, particularly in my episodes. She doesn't have a lot of dialogue, and she tells a million stories through her reactions. Like the scene with Jake where she goes in and she's challenging him, and she's got this strength and she wants answers. And then by the end, he seduces her. Like the journey that both she and he went on were incredible. And speaking to her being a child actor and speaking to keeping Hendrix safe, it was very important to Anna to keep Hendrix safe. She really took it upon herself to make sure that that Hendrix was just safe the entire time, especially the scene in the doctor's office and things like that. So but she's incredible. I'm sure everyone has stories about Anna. The whole cast was just so special.
Yeah, and Anna and McKenna were really close too, and I think that was important for McKenna, who's just incredible in this. But I think that really speaks to the strength of the show, is that Marianne and Bob have these great story arcs, that it's not just about Jan's grooming, but about their grooming as well. And you need several hours to understand the many years that this was going on.
And even though I had I'd seen the documentary that came out a couple of years ago, so I was familiar with the trajectory of the story. What the show really highlighted for me, there's a line I think Marianne has of, oh honey, we did everything wrong. You have nothing to apologize for. And watching the show, I thought about how many things they also did right, and how much love they gave to Jan as she was struggling and as she didn't know how to grapple with the truth or reality of what happened. There was so much consistency in, we love you, we'll always love you. And even if you don't want to talk to me, you're going to run away, you're going to push me away. And that was something that almost felt out of time, to be watching a period piece from the 70s and to have that kind of compassion in a father and in parents dealing with something so traumatic. It was really, really touching to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think Jan would also say that the support she had from her family was ultimately what saved her, was because she had them, and through the whole thing, through the revelation, through the really becoming aware of what was happening to her, that Marianne and Bob were there for her when she needed them.
Yeah, I think, we all looked at it as a collective coming of age narrative, and it's really about the entire family's growth. And coming of age is in like a process of sort of disillusionment, of like realizing things about the world that you haven't realized before, and how it changes your perception of yourself, your community, and everything. And we sort of saw it as, a collective coming of age tale.
Mm-hmm.
And I want you all to shout out again, anyone involved in the production design, the score. I mean, the setting of this, even the fact that the old NBC logo is at the beginning of every episode.
Yeah.
It really made a stark reminder of like, this was a time when pedophile wasn't common vocabulary.
Yeah.
Well, I think also we made a decision very early on, like, okay, the show, it takes place in the 70s, but, these people are really living closer to the 50s, in some ways. And when you make a period show, it's not like everything is not just of that moment, that it's, you see traces and elements of the decades that came before it. And they are just slightly out of time or out of step with the period, I would say. And that was a decision that we all made in the world, Rebecca's work and John's work. It was all really, really designed closely to Jan's real world. So it doesn't feel just like, an idea of that period.
Yeah, people that I would want to shout out, Leo Tipton, obviously, because we didn't talk about their performance, and they are also just so special. Their portrayal of Gail, just amazing. And in post, like Joe Murphy, like these episodes, at least for me, I don't know for everyone else, they were big. Like, I think the original scripts that Nick gave me were like 95 scenes and 85 scenes. And we managed to take some scenes out, but my cuts were 75 minutes each, and we had to get them down to 45 minutes. And a lot of what we took out broke my heart. But Joe Murphy is like such a brilliant editor and was such a wonderful partner in crime, helping to get it there. And so definitely want to shout him out too.
I want to shout out everyone on the crew, but especially Ariel, who did the score, is incredible.
Yes.
And my editor Fabian was amazing. But yeah, everyone who worked on it.
Yeah, whole cast and crew. I mean, from California to Atlanta, like really the most amazing team all around, for sure.
Yeah, I agree with that. We have like a very, very good cast, but like a fabulous cast. Rebecca, like what you mentioned there, Eliza is like bringing over like the real thing, taking the photographs, and with John taking the photographs of the actual place and trying to replicate as much as they can. you know, what they lived, you know, like their settings, the set of the place was another thing, you know, like how they wanted to be as close as they can to reality, which was also like really nice, but also brings a challenge or other challenge, but that's for another show. And then another time to share. But, you know, there was really like a nice, the objective, like to try to replicate a little bit of how they live, you know, as the inspiration. And like Eliza said, just grabbing other things, you know, like this is a Mormon family that might live in the 70s, but their mindset or their, you know, the culture or whatever their customs were a little bit like, you know, from another generation. And for me, and I guess for Celiana, we have incredible crew. Like the crew that we have in Atlanta was amazing, was really, really great. The show was like challenging in many ways, the long, you know, how long it is and how, you know, everybody stick together to make these episodes come true was fabulous. The same thing, like the people that we have and the crew that we have in Los Angeles was really, really great. And for me, what I really like about this show is from like the PAs to the people that, you know, that did COVID to transportation, I felt everybody was like really, really somebody people that I like to work with, that it was really nice, you know, despite, you know, some days are good, some days are not. That's how we do, you know, that's how it's filming, but it's really nice when everybody's pushing forward. And I really, I feel thankful and grateful for that.
Well, thank you all so much. This is so wonderful also to hear about the collaborative and the positive attitude on set when we know we're dealing in this true crime genre and we're dealing with something that could be a tough sell, or it could be something that people are just going to jump on without knowing what to expect. And it's absolutely breathtaking. It really is, like I said, so immersive. And if you haven't watched it and if you listen to this whole thing, well, you might know what happened, but please check it out. I want to thank you all so much for taking the time to speak with us on the filmmaking process, and everyone who's watching, thank you for being with us. And please go to our website, WIF.org. You can become a member. Memberships are discounted right now until the end of the year. Apply to the financing intensive or a fellowship, and we have information about the helpline. And also, please reach out to us if you were as inspired as I was by these fabulous women and talking about how you can work with survivors on set, how you can have safe and supportive sets when you're dealing with possibly difficult subject matter or sets that are difficult for the workers, for the employees whose health and safety is very tantamount to a successful and wonderful experience. So again, I just want to thank all of you for taking the time to speak with us today.